you very much for coming. The reason that we are holding this event is that we would like to widen the pool of experienced dialogue practitioners. We have some a kind of core cabal who are very adept, but I think that new blood is always a good thing. We would also very much like to encourage people to collaborate. This might be collaborations across contractors who are already adept at dialogue, or it might be collaborations with people who bring other skills to the table. So that's something we would like to really encourage. I'm just going to take you through the agenda. So I've explained the purpose of the meeting. Suze is going to take us through a potted history of Sciencewise with some case studies and examples of the dialogues that have been run over the years. And then we're going to look at both the content and structure of proposals and what it is that we look for when we're scoring proposals. After each of those content and structure sessions, we'll have a little break, during which time you can think of questions. So we'll have a 10-minute break after the content presentation, and you can go and get a cup of tea and think of some questions. And then we will carry on to look at structure. And at the end of the session, we will have a more detailed Q&A and discussion. We've allowed 2 hours. It might not take as long as 2 hours. It depends on how many questions you have, or how long the discussion lasts. We will also feed back on what we will do with the recording and what we will do with your questions as well after that. But I think I will hand over to Suze now, who's going to take us through an overview of Sciencewise.
Great, thanks, Diane. Sorry, I was just finishing off on the chat there, just to flag the people who had just joined that we're recording the session, and I'll post another link to the Miro for those people as well. So I know that lots of the people on the call today are very familiar with Sciencewise and have known it for a number of years, and perhaps through the different iterations that it's been through. But I know that some people might be newer to it. Just for a bit of context, I'm the Deputy Programme Director for Sciencewise, and I also play the role of a dialogue and engagement specialist. So I sit alongside the project right from their beginning concept right the way through to completion, and supporting primarily the commissioners, but also the contractors and the oversight group through that process as well. So Sciencewise, as it says there, UKRI's flagship programme for public dialogue, and it's really there to provide evidence on the public aspirations, concerns and views and values around new and emerging areas of science and technology, looking both at the potential that new science and tech has, but also the disadvantages and insights that the public have. Thanks, Richard. The public have to enable more socially informed research and policy making. So where's the public voice coming into the development of research and policy making? We do that through providing expert advice, assurance, and also co-funding. I'll come to that again in a little bit. And since Sciencewise was established in 2004, that's resulted in about 70 public dialogues on a whole plethora of different issues. As well as doing the public dialogues themselves, one of our key kind of purposes is build evidence, to share learning, to build the kind of capacity and the competence of other commissioners to think about doing public dialogue as well, so that we create a more systematic approach to hearing public voice in policy and research, and make that part and parcel of all the developments that happen in research and policy making. Next slide, please, Diane. So just a bit of history. Again, some people were there probably right at the outset and might be able to give me a lesson on it as well. But Sciencewise really out of some of the kind of policy failures, I suppose, of much of the sort of late 90s, very late 90s in particular. So BSE, GM foods. And that kind of, as I see it, that sort of crystallized this change in thinking about how science is done, how policy is done, and that kind of pivotal House of Lords Science and Society report in 2000, and that quote on the left, you know, very much saying that unless we understand where the public is coming from, unless we understand what those attitudes, what those values are, what's driving concerns, unless we build that in right at the outset of policy and research, then we shouldn't be surprised if there are policies that then hit the blocks and are less than successful in terms of implementation. So Sciencewise was sort of born from that, though kind of started in 2004, and it's been through a number of iterations. And so it's looked slightly different over that period as well. Each time there's sort of been a relet of the Sciencewise programme contract, and it's also been within different departments. It's been housed within different departments as well. So each iteration as well of the programme has had a different budget and a slightly different focus as well. But at the kind of core of it, it's always been a programme that provides that public dialogue support, and also shares the learning and shares the knowledge and shares the insight of those public dialogues. Sciencewise dialogues do have some core features, and I'll come on later to say about why they're not all the same, but there are core features of what we see that are public dialogues, and those are embedded in both the Sciencewise guiding principles and the quality framework, both of which are up on the Sciencewise website. So that gives some indications about things like the sorts of public dialogue that we will support, and kind of critical things in that are things like those dialogues have to have a route to impact. They have to be informing a strategy, a policy, and that's some of the early work that we do with commissioners, is establishing what are you going to do with the outcomes of this? What's it going to inform, for example? In terms of the scope of the work and the sort of shape of the programme at the moment, we support kind of between 3 and 5 public dialogues a year. And they might run for 6 months, they might run for 18 months. You know, each dialogue is very, very different in that respect. And in terms of the kind of, I suppose, financial value of each of those projects, they might be anything from a £90,000, they don't tend to be much smaller than that, through to a sort of 250,000-ish project, you know, and so that's the sort of ballpark that we have dialogues in. Do you want to go through the next slide? So this is a little bit of detail, but I thought it's worth just thinking about what happens before you might see the ITT as well. So we'll get involved right at the outset, and whether that's been because we've proactively approached a commissioner, or more than often than not, they've come to us and they've said, oh, we're thinking of doing some public dialogue. And a dialogue and engagement specialist will work with them and just say, you know, is this department one that's eligible for support? Is it the sort of topic that looks right for dialogue? Has it got that potential for impact? Are the timescales realistic for Sciencewise? You know, all the sorts of things probably that you also do with other clients in working out whether this is the right sort of scope of project for public dialogue. But also, given that we have, you know, a relatively limited, you know, parameter of both funding and numbers of projects, We also look and say, okay, is this an organisation that Sciencewise has funded before? Is it in a topic that maybe public dialogue hasn't appeared in before? You know, is it therefore something that if we can demonstrate a good public dialogue in this area, then it will, you know, it will broaden that understanding in the wider kind of policy and research field that public dialogue is a good thing and that there's experience that can be laid down on that. So then we will proceed to the next level, and then there's a couple of hoops that the commissioner has to go through in terms of developing a concept note and then a fuller business case. And throughout that process as well, we're sort of building their understanding about, well, what might be the kind of key attributes that define your public dialogue? What's different about it? Are you starting to think now about your oversight group? Who's on it? So we get people, try to get commissioners to think about that really early. What's your procurement route? Again, thinking about that really early, because we find quite often that's the thing that delays things coming to ITT, and thinking through timelines. When does this really need to happen? And quite often pushing commissioners and saying, why do you need it to be by the end of December? What's the real driver for that? Because we always sort of, I suppose, think that dialogue should, you know, the time frame quite often is driven by something, but not making it unrealistically short unless there's a really good reason for that. And then it also goes through our internal kind of QA process where we have, you know, some external input on that. So then that will formally go through for a decision to co-fund from UKRI. So at any point before, it could also fall over and could not be funded. And that funding would be up to a maximum of 50% of the cost of the whole dialogue, including the evaluation. But we do match in-kind time, so time that the commissioners will be putting themselves in staff time in the project. And then it's very much, you know, working through the timelines for the ITT, refining the oversight group, trying to get a lot of things in place before the ITT, you know, goes out so that we can hit the ground running. And then in parallel for the ITT going out to tender is an ITT for the evaluation, which is commissioned at the same time. We may well get some other questions on this, but predominantly we see that the Sciencewise tenders will go through the research and insights, CCS research and insights framework. In previous iterations of Sciencewise, there was a Sciencewise framework that doesn't exist anymore. And the other thing that is also a bit different from more recently is that we expect that the commissioners will do their commissioning. There was a phase where Sciencewise would do, you know, would run the commissioning side for them, and we don't do that. It's now very much down to the commissioners to drive that, but predominantly as their government departments or research organisations, they will use research and insights. They can, of course, go out to open tender, but as we know, that takes you know, much longer time. We then have questions coming through from contractors. We very rarely phase them, and we really try to push. I know it sometimes doesn't feel that way. We really try and push for as long as possible for contractors to respond to the ITT. When all of your bids come through, then we have a scoring panel that is usually made up of 2 people from Sciencewise, 2 people from the commissioning organisation, and so, you know, as a maximum usually of a 4-person team. And we will go through all of the bids, and most of the time, I'd say 99% of the time, we do not see the financial information associated with your bids, and that has implications, I think, in terms of what you put in as well. So that's usually scored separately. I'll just finish this and then I'll come to you, Darren. And the other thing that we have is a very strict criteria to score against, you know, we can only score on what is in the tender. So it's quite a prescriptive process that we have to go through. put in the scores. Again, there is guidance that we have to follow around what that scoring looks like. You know, are you going to give somebody 100? Are you going to give them a 60? And quite, you know, we can't usually give people a 65 or something. So there are some quite defined parameters against which we have to score things. And then that results after there's been some, you know, inputting of that data, the wheels get turned and out pops a successful supplier, and that moves forward to the contract award. Darren, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. The first is there anything in advance of the first bucket? So I don't know if you connected into, I don't know, Karen Fulks and the teams, or some sort of strategic horizon scanning function within government. Where do these things come from? Is it just at someone's whim, or is there a slightly more strategic way at identifying what might benefit from the dialogue? And then I wasn't quite aware, I'm now nicking the time that I've got, that you didn't see the financial part of the assessment. So I just wondered how the concept of value works in that context. Anyway, yeah. I know that's a ridiculous thing to ask, but I'll have to ask it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And we might pick up some of this before, just really quickly on that. How we generate, yes, we are plugged in with different organizations and different contacts. So you mentioned there Karen and Go Science, and I suppose we do what we can in a relatively small team. So I also know that, you know, the wider pool of people that know Sciencewise and are kind of ambassadors for Sciencewise in different ways, kind of informally, can sometimes say, oh, that sounds like something that might, you know, be useful for Sciencewise. So really appreciate people who do that on our behalf. So I suppose we have some sort of core themes that we would like to see dialogue areas in, and then we try to keep kind of plugged in with those theme areas and with the contacts that are there. Sometimes it's completely, you know, it is completely random. Obviously we do, Sciencewise does quite a lot of awareness raising, and that might be one-to-one meetings with people, it might be kind of lunch and learns like this, or webinars. So we're trying to, or the social media work, so we're trying to sort of spread the awareness of Sciencewise and what it can do, and then channel that and funnel that towards people popping up. And sometimes it can be, you know, I was talking a couple of weeks ago with an organisation that I last spoke to 2.5 years ago, and 2.5 years ago the time wasn't right, but now the time is right. So yes, there are some themes there that we sort of try to build more proactive awareness of Sciencewise, and then sometimes it's a bit on a whim as well. In terms of the financials, and I can't remember off the top of my head, the kind of financial criteria is quite a low percentage. If you've seen previous bids, I think it's no more than 20%. And so those other factors that we look at in the bids, the approach, the team, the response, you know, the you know, detailed approach of responding to that ITT, form far more of the kind of our judgment in terms of the value of a project. So it's, you know, sometimes I suppose, you know, I wouldn't do any kind of mathematical gymnastics on this, but I think it would be often unlikely that the finance alone would be the key driver to winning a bid, because the other criteria, you know, are worth 70-80% of that. If there are other kind of points on that, we can definitely come back to that in the question session. So just to flag that there's no one Sciencewise approach or model. We expect, and I would hope that you would expect, that everything is bespoke to the needs of that particular context or topic or commissioner. So every ITT is different, and there's not a one way to do a Sciencewise project. really quickly on the next, on this slide. So just to sort of elaborate on that, obviously, and this is a real potted smorgasbord of a journey around some of the Sciencewise dialogues, but obviously face-to-face, and that's historically where Sciencewise has been, online, both using platforms, not using platforms, you know, but they all Sciencewise dialogues do have, you know, a face-to-face element, whether that's in person or online, and then supplemented through other ways. You know, really creative materials used in dialogue, so imaginaries of future worlds and enabling that to prompt people, whether that be through sort of imagined news pieces or videos or tickets to the future. We've seen it kind of experiential elements in dialogues, where people have experienced what a autonomous vehicle is like, or what a drone is like, and use that as part of the dialogue as well. We've seen panels as well as you know, much, so up to 700 people panels used in different ways. We've had films as part of dialogues, showing the value, both used as part of showing lived experiences throughout the dialogue, but also in showing the kind of product of the dialogue. We've seen wider views engaged in dialogues through that distributed dialogue, and I think recently a sort of AI platform chatbot was used as well to reach out further to participants, friends and families as well. We've seen lived experienced parallel tracks happening on dialogues, with whether that be previous drug users, whether it be new parents, whether it be people with certain conditions, whether it be people who have experienced you know, domestic abuse, or a migrant. So lots of different lived experience that can sometimes come in, as well as the kind of reflective public. We've seen stakeholder workshops as part of building the platform, building the starting insight for a dialogue, and we've seen literature reviews at the outset. We've seen dialogues that engage 30 people and dialogues that engage sort of 700 plus participants. So, you know, all of those reports that are there, they're all on the Sciencewise website. That's a rapid kind of run through, but I suppose it's to really kind of take home that there is no one approach and model, and that we really look to see the kind of creativity from contractors as well in how they respond to the ITTs. Okay, I think that's plenty from me. I went on a little bit longer probably than my time allocation. Diane.
Thank you very much. I miserably failed at the start to actually introduce myself. Apologies for that. So I'm Diane Beddoes. I work alongside Suze. I'm the lead evaluator for the programme. I work as a DES. I have oversight over all of the dialogues that are going on, and kind of backup or problem solver if dialogues get into difficulties, and an external perspective is useful. I'm also generally, I chair the scoring meetings, unless I'm a DES, in which case I actually would score. So we have great proposals. Generally, we have, you know, really, really great proposals. We sometimes see people who are less familiar with dialogue put in proposals where you think the quality is there, but you sort of haven't got your head around dialogue and what it is doing and why it exists in the first place. So that was one of the motivators for this particular session, is to really get people to have a insight into what we look for in proposals and what are the kind of baselines, and as Darren question alluded to, sort of how do we assess value? So we're going to look at content first of all. Just quickly, where does this is one of multiple types of spectrum of engagement. So we sort of sit around the consult involve level. We don't ask people to make decisions. Dialogue is not asking people to make a decision on a particular policy. We are asking for people's views. What are the diversity of views on the ethical and social implications of a particular technology, and potentially where it sits within a wider system? Dialogues, as Sue said, range from quite specific, focused. So we have done one on carbon capture, use and storage, for example. There was reference to where it sits within a wider energy system, but it wasn't the focus. We've done something much more recently, which looked at genome engineering, genome editing in farmed animals, where the sort of system perspective was a very, very sort of crucial and critical part of the dialogue. So the scope is flexible, but we always sit around that consult involve level. Oops, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Okay, so what is public dialogue? A structured conversation with publics and specialists on the social and ethical implications of new and emerging science and technology. So it's a structured conversation. That's the kind of crucial element of that. And it's with publics and specialists. So we want the conversation to be between publics and specialists. We don't want specialists to come in, present from on high, and then leave. So the conversational aspect of specialist involvement has to be part of the dialogue. The samples are not representative. We generally don't have enough people for that to be the case. They're reflective of the UK population. And we might often involve special interest groups. So Suze has mentioned, you know, we might involve patients, for example. We might involve people with particular conditions. We might involve people who are using particular services, or people who have particular life experiences. Typically, dialogues last 2 to 3 days, could be sort of 12 to 18 hours. Now we're online a lot more. We tend not to work in days. That interaction between specialist policymakers, NGOs, business, whoever has a stake in the particular topic we're looking at, is really crucial. All dialogues, bar a couple of what we're calling mini dialogues, but we'll leave those out, the conversation. They all have oversight groups, and that is to provide independent governance of the dialogue. Oversight groups need to reflect the range of debates and perspectives on a particular topic, so that the materials that are generated as part of the dialogue, so information materials, stimulus materials, and materials could include specialist presentations as well, so that these materials reflect the full range of debates and potential perspectives on the topic. We don't want people to take part in a dialogue and then think they've been led to a particular conclusion or a particular perspective. The oversight group looks after the quality of the process and the quality of the content. there is an evaluation, and that is absolutely crucial, and I'm really glad to see that we've got at least one evaluator here. So the evaluator works alongside the dialogue contractors, both in a formative role, asking good questions, and summative role at the end. Sue's mentioned the framing documents. It's probably best to say how they apply by referring to some of the things that slightly drive you up the wall as you read proposals, which is, you know, we've read the Sciencewise guidelines and quality framework. That's it. You don't see them anywhere else. You have no insight into how those how those aspects of the quality framework have informed the design. How have they been taken into consideration in the approach taken to the dialogue? So context is around, is this a timely, is this dialogue happening at a timely moment? What else is going on? So have you actually, when you're writing the proposal, have you thought about how these quality framework, how does it apply in this particular case, in this particular, on this particular topic, at this particular time? How is it informing the way that you are delivering? Have you really looked and thought about what the delivery aspect or the scope and design aspects say about involvement of specialists? That's one of the things that we look for when we score proposals, is have you just written a sentence that says we've read these, or have you actually thought about how they apply in a particular case? The quality framework is in the middle of undergoing a revision, partly prompted by the pandemic and the move online, because we didn't really have anything about online, but it will include new sections on power and privilege in particular. So that's one thing that we want to sort of foreground. How is power and privilege working? Are there topics, particular topics, where you need to think about this quite hard in order to work out the design, work out who's involved, work out how this, how you're going to run your events, for example, who's going to run your events. The ethical issues associated with any research. And this kind of is a form of research. So thinking through consent. How are you going to make sure that people recognize that consent should be ongoing? If people wish to withdraw consent temporarily and retreat from a conversation, how are you supporting people to be able to do that? Risks and challenges I mention in particular because people often conflate them. So we'll ask for somebody to lay out a risk table, and we'll ask for people to identify the challenges. Often we only get one. We get the risk table. People title it challenges and then talk about risks. They're different things. So think about the language that was used, as Sue's talked about. A lot of work goes into the development of an ITT, and whilst they're not always as elegant as they might be, I recognise that, people do think quite carefully about what they're asking for. So read carefully. What are you asking from the Commissioner is worth thinking about as well. So are you asking the Commissioner to identify all the specialists, or will you do that? So that's another way in which we're kind of always trying to assess value, is what actually are these people going to do on this project, and what are they asking the Commissioner to do? So very often the Commissioner is the secretariat for the oversight group. It's worth saying you know, we expect the commissioner to be the oversight for the secretariat for the oversight group. Otherwise, we don't know. So design and team, these are kind of core bits of your proposal. So a coherent design with a clear rationale. So why have you decided that this approach is the optimal approach for this particular project of this particular scale on this particular topic? So why? All the questions are about why. Why have you decided that you want to have workshops of 25 people? Why not 15? You know, so there might be budgetary reasons. You know, you might think, actually, you know, we can split 25 into 2 smaller groups, so we only need a lead facilitator and 2 table facilitators, whatever the reason. And budgetary reasons are fine, because we recognize that budgets are often tight. So why have you chosen this design? Why these people? So we always look for an inclusive sample that reflects the UK population, but there may be additional people who, when you think about an issue and start to do some initial research, you think, actually, these people will be particularly affected by a particular topic or a particular take and policy decision on a particular topic. So we think it's really important that we talk to those people. Are you going to include those special interest groups within the main body of the sample, or are you going to do something separate with them? Sometimes people suggest smaller focus groups, for example, with particular communities. They might suggest doing outreach work, so producing packs, making lots of contacts with voluntary organisations and giving people their own packs, and then getting the feedback from those. That's certainly a model that's been used before in Sciencewise. Very often in a proposal, you're not going to get into sort of a lot of detail about the activities you're going to do and the tools. But if you think of something particularly useful, or so, for example, if you are going to include animations as a way of presenting information, or particularly creative materials, why do you think that this particular project warrants that? Then how will you present information? I think one of the things that I often feel is missing from proposals is that kind of strategic approach to presenting information. Why are specialists used to present some information but not all information? So how are you using the specialists, and why are you using specialists for this information and not other information? Why is some information written? Are you, for example, using written information and then asking specialists to elaborate on that? So just think really strategically about what information people need to know and how it is that you're going to present it. You don't need necessarily to, and you won't have the words, to include all this in a proposal, but if you thought about it, then you can just write a short paragraph, a couple of sentences to explain, so that we get inside your heads, essentially. Team size, not too big, not too small. A big team often is a bit worrying, because you're thinking, are they just going to disappear for some of the time? It can be quite difficult to corral a big team. Having expertise is great, but why is it relevant to this project? And that goes with agency expertise as well. So tell us not what you have done, but why why that is relevant to this particular project. What have you learned from it that you will apply in this particular project? I've mentioned collaboration and consortia and cooperating. We would really like to see creative partners involved in dialogues more. Again, back to Darren's point about value, write in the number of days per team member. That's really a useful way of us thinking, okay, so they've got 3 directors, but they're only playing a day each on the project. That's no good. You know, we make judgments about the amount of senior time that's involved, for example. Is your team going to be consistent throughout? Are you using temps for facilitators? How are you training your temps? Have you used them before? That should say content expertise, not context expertise. That's a really interesting question. So sometimes people will choose a content expert and have them on the team. It's not always a good thing. We are hiring people for process expertise, not for content expertise. The specialists and the oversight group will provide content expertise. It can backfire. So we have had proposals where somebody has had content expertise on their team and the commissioner has reacted quite badly, saying, oh, you know, they've got a really strong position on this. I wouldn't want them involved in determining the content. So just think twice before you include content expertise and try and do a bit of scoping. It can be really useful because it can act as a shorthand to getting really sort of getting your head round a topic very quickly. But just think about it and think about whether your content expert has a particular take on a topic that might play badly with the commissioner. I'm just going to whiz through this really quickly because I've been talking for a long time. So just thinking about how are you going to capture data? What data are you going to capture? Are you using different platforms? So will you have face-to-face qual data? Will you have some platform data from an online platform? How are you going to analyze these? How are you going to weight the different channels through which you're gathering data? Who's going to be involved? Are you going to hold an analysis meeting that the commissioner comes to? Have you got an example of a report that they can look at? The ITT should be an example of how well you write and how you structure information, because that gives us a kind of like a really good taster of what your final outputs are going to be like. How many comment rounds are in your budget? It's worth putting that in the proposal because we don't see that, so it's often a question. How are you going to involve the participants? Are you going to involve the participants in analysis and reporting? It's worth looking at the quality framework to see what it says about participant involvement in that. How are you going to feed back to the participants? Will you do an easy read version? Are you going to film the process? Is their budget sufficient to film the process, or would you ask for more budget, for example? We can often tell when people are gaming, trying to game the budget. Well, they'll sort of add on a really interesting option as a sort of interesting extra, and then say it's not included within the budget, and we think, oh, you just budgeted low, haven't you? On the basis that we'll probably include that, and that will just take us up to the ceiling of the budget. So we often can spot when people are trying to game a budget and come in low. So that's it. Be straightforward with it. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. That was a lot of information very quickly, and probably most of it you already know and you already think about it anyway. So we're going to have a 10-minute break now, and use the Miro board to write down questions, or you can hold your questions until the discussion at the end. So we'll come back at 1:30. So thank you very much. Okay, I will just assume that people are here and busy writing questions on Miro. So the second thing that we would like to look at is structuring a proposal. So I guess the main thing is to think about who you're talking to and what else have they got on their plate. So make life as easy as possible for people, and they will immediately look fondly upon you. Sometimes people have 5 proposals to read in a day, so the easier it is for people to extract relevant information, the better. So sometimes you can read a proposal and you still think, I still don't really get a sense about how this all fits together. I know they're doing some workshops here and some stakeholder work here, but I still don't get how it flows. So how can you use structure and the style of your proposal to make it easier to extract that information? Is language accessible? So are you using terminology that is perhaps not familiar? Thinking about the fact that commissioners may have never commissioned a dialogue before, so they won't be familiar with some of the language that you are familiar with as contractors. And people who are experienced in running dialogues or running engagement or running research. So make sure that you take that into account and make sure your language is accessible to an audience who might be inexperienced. Are you echoing language used in the ITT? So if people say a particular thing is particularly important in their ITT, are you highlighting that and how you are going to address it? So are you using subheadings, for example, to help signpost the reader to the issues that, or to your response to particular questions in the ITT? Sue's mentioned the scoring process. So there will be often a question document with sort of 3 or 4 questions on it. We look for answers to those questions, but we also look for requests in the ITT. Contractors are expected to, contractors must, all that sort of language through an ITT helps us to look for particular points in a proposal. So review your proposal against the ITT and make sure you picked out all those points and that they're easy for the reader to see. Diagrams, bullet points, subheadings, flowcharts, all those sorts of things are great because they just make it easier to get your head around what is being proposed. And as I said earlier, they can be a sort of exemplar of the quality of your reports and your written material. So that's useful. And don't underestimate enthusiasm. You know, you can sometimes read that people really, really want a piece of work, that it ticks all the buttons for them. and ticks all the buttons, pushes all the buttons for them. So don't be shy about being enthusiastic. If you think a particular piece of work is just right up your street, it's really important, and that you have a lot of enthusiasm for it, please say, because commissioners would obviously like to work with people who are hungry for the work, rather than people who kind of don't really care one way or the other. I think I've said that. Have you answered all the questions asked in the ITT? The questions asked explicitly and implicitly. Spelling mistakes. A lot of commissioners will be really resistant to spelling mistakes. Some, but only very few, don't seem to worry that much about them. I have a real bugbear. So please don't just spell check, but read it through, because you know, some words have more than one spelling, but sound the same, and aren't picked up in a spell check. So please do that, because it really does, again, speak to the professionalism and the quality of your final outputs. This is a definite, I mentioned before, tell us why your expertise has relevance for this particular piece of work. We don't mark reputation. We only mark what's in a proposal, and we only score what's in a proposal. So you have to, it's no good saying, you know, we've done this and this and this and this and all these previous pieces of work. That is sort of irrelevant. We need to understand why all that expertise is relevant to this particular piece of work. So, you know, show us in your proposals that you're great to work with, and that you've got your head around this proposal. Don't just tell us.